Are we expecting like a class from CIA or anything to come on?
Not from my class. They avoid me at all costs outside of school.
Sarah Paul, the sculpture instructor,
Yeah.
offered credit to her students to sign in on this class. So I am not certain.
Yeah, I was just curious because a year ago or something, we had a conversation about.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Just curious. Well, sorry that they avoid you at all costs, Scott.
More of a reflection of me, probably. Yeah.
I think maybe everyone's in the funk right now.
Yeah. What do you say? Should we start? And I will just keep allowing people to come in as they sign on.
Sure.
Okay. All right, wait a minute. Let me make my screen big. Okay. Okay. All right, well, we're a small group for now, but hi, everybody. Okay, I'm going to start off. I'm Grace Chin. I'm the director of the Sculpture Center. Welcome, everybody. Let me tell you a little bit about the Sculpture Center if you don't know already. The Sculpture Center is committed to exhibiting the work of early career artists and also playing an important role in the life cycle of a sculptor. Giving artists exhibition opportunities is one way we do this. Another way we do this is by mentoring. Tonight, we will be sharing career stories and also mentoring other artists. So I love the idea of early career artists mentoring younger artists. And that's why we're here tonight to kind of offer this to the community of artists, whether, depending on wherever you are in your career. But really, we're hoping that we can inspire some younger artists to keep pursuing what they're doing. If I could just share my own observations about Zoom. Personally, I feel like we rarely speak amongst each other on Zoom. I feel like we're all these little squares and we just say something, another person says something. And I feel like it's really unique when people start crossing the squares and talking with each other. So that's what I'm hoping we're going to do tonight. And I've invited our 4 early career artists exhibiting in 2020. These are artists who are part of the Sculpture Center's Revealed exhibition series. I'm going to admit some more people. So I have Emily Duke, Scott Goss, Kylie Ford, and Chelsea Flowers. So these 4 artists were selected to be part of the Revealed exhibition series, which is a solid pillar of the Sculpture Center in giving young artists an opportunity to exhibit their work. Every year, the Sculpture Center selects 4 to 6 artists from a pool of about 50 artists. We have a diverse exhibition committee that goes through the portfolios. Laila Voss, who's here tonight, who's here tonight, is our facilitator. She serves on the exhibition committee and has done so for a number of years. She is an artist herself, a multimedia artist who is inspired by the urban landscape and also the interior landscape. So it's very fitting that she is joining us as our facilitator. But what we asked the artists to do tonight is to ask questions to each other. And so I kind of gave them a start, like, here's what I think we should talk about. And on their own, they came up with their own set of questions for each other. And so hopefully we'll really get an idea of what helps their career, what hinders their career, what kind of gets them off the ground. So with that, I am going to hand over the microphone to Laila, and she will speak with the artists and get everything going. Thanks, Laila.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And it's really great to be here. Nice to meet all of you, at least in a frame, those of you who I have not met before. And so I'll just jump into starting with the questions. And so while you were in school, what were your goals as an artist, and what did you think being a successful artist meant? Have these expectations and goals changed or evolved based on opportunities and challenges you've had since graduation?
Don't all answer at once.
Well, Emily, you had a question to Kyle. Do you want to ask her that?
I'm okay like starting the dialogue with the first question. I was thinking about, I was really interested when this question popped up of what do you define as success, especially, and how does that kind of transition when you're in school? And throughout school, and how that definition of success, being a successful artist, changes. So I'm trying to think my main goals. It was kind of interesting transitioning from a student where it's like I kind of had the clear goals of I was interested in pursuing an MFA. I was interested in exhibiting, and I kind of ranked the idea of success or being a successful artist on kind of these external sources of validation. Like, is my work readily accepted by a large group of people, or is it worth some sort of monetary purpose of some sort? And kind of seeing how I started emerging in the things that I care about as I exist kind of in the world and as I start making. The art that moves me the most and what I would determine as successful now is some that I leave thinking about the world differently after I've experienced it, or something that's given me some other source of, it's like I'm able to see the world through somebody else's lens for this temporary moment that changes my way of thinking and thought. So in thinking about like my goals as an artist now, it's just to really kind of think about the things that I'm most in tune with, or the aspects of influence that speak to me the most, so that I can get closer to achieving that goal. So when somebody's seeing my work through my lens, maybe they're leaving with a different thought than what they had come with.
I think that's
Go ahead.
where,
Sorry.
sorry, excuse me, Emily. I was gonna say, I think that's really great, this notion of like changing someone's perspective. Because taking a step back and thinking about what my goals were as an artist, like when I was in school, and also how it's changed so much from like undergrad to grad school and then like post-grad school. Like, what does that mean for like success? But I think the goal has just always been to like make sure like I'm still making something or still producing something, just because like the manner in which I view art, it's like I view art as a way I'm like publishing, like, or it's how I'm publishing my ideas or processes of what are my thoughts about the world or X, Y, and Z. So really it's a form of like cathartic therapy in a sense. So like to still be like working on myself means to still be making artwork, to still be growing and whatnot. But thinking about, once again, going back to this idea about like what my current goals are now, it's definitely the notion, like I'll ask the question, will you think about this tomorrow? And it really is the idea is like, I hope that you will. I hope that like these thoughts that I present in my work will make you kind of question, wonder, be inquisitive, or further pursue more information about the topic that I brought up in my work. So yeah, that really, Kylie, the comment like really kind of struck me of like, anyways, yeah, I totally agree. Wanting to change someone's perspective.
Yeah. I think that like that is one prong. And then also like for me, like there's like a very fundamental, like I will make sure that I have a space, because I feel like primarily what I'm working with needs equipment, but like that, I think leaving school, even undergraduate, like compromising on other things in my life to make sure I had a studio. So like, like making sure that those things were available to me and it was integrated into my life, that I had like kiln access and space and like being really flexible in other ways, like taking different types of jobs that didn't have anything to do with art making, so that I could have that kiln access, you know, I could pay for that thing or this thing by doing this odd job. So I think that like leaving school, that was one major thing. And then there's also like the work, right? Like making sure you're making the work, and that hopefully like that you are able to share that work. And I think, you know, longer goal success, which is that's a hard one anyways. But that potentially, I think in my mind, like the way that I think about that might be like the venues change, hopefully progressively, that like the venues in which the art is, or the way that I'm connecting to people can change. And even if that is, you know, mixed in together, but it is different, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's not in like the silo that it's always been in. And for me, I think about that as a ceramics community. Like, I feel like success for me is to not potentially be stuck in that community only, and to kind of branch out from there.
Yeah, Emily, I'm probably in the same boat as you. My background in art is in glass. And so access to studio space has always been a primary goal. And then trying to maintain access to that studio space has been early on through multiple jobs or freelance things or whatever. And then trying to find a way to get into the studio. I'll say when I came out of school, because I'm from a craft program, or the program was more craft based, I felt like I had this need or expectation upon myself that I had to find representation in a gallery, and in a big time gallery had to be the goal. And now I'm realizing that, not that I can't do it, that never was my priority. And my priority has already been just to be able to make work and be able to display my work, and just finding whatever is the best opportunity based on what I'm making currently.
So I think if we want to go to I'm supposed to ask this next question.
Yes.
Is that good timing? Okay. So this is for Kylie. And what is your process when it comes to applying for opportunities like shows, residencies, fellowships, and grants? And then how do you decide what's best for your practice at the time?
Yeah, I'll look at my notes really quick to do a quick refresher. But essentially when I'm thinking about the things I'm applying for, the things that I prioritize when I'm applying for, I look to my CV, I look to my kind of personal desires, and just kind of figure out what gaps need filled. So when I'm thinking about if I'm really interested in, maybe I do a lot of woodwork, but when I'm working with the same medium kind of over and over and over again, sometimes I just need a little jolt, and it makes me come back to the things that I love with a little bit of a different perspective. So if I'm thinking about things like that, or needing experience with a different medium, I'll sit and think about prioritizing and applying for opportunities like workshops and things. So I'm really fortunate now. I'm working with the Pittsburgh Glass Center, or I have been for quite some time, because that's also been postponed due to the pandemic. So totally new medium that they're pairing non-glass artists with glass artists to execute an idea. And that's just been a super refreshing, just kind of wonderful change in perspective, and a nice kind of hybrid. I also think if I'm thinking about residencies or needing to have this kind of more immersive experience with my work, I have to think about those things over the summer as I do teach as well. I start prioritizing those sorts of things. I'm starting to look at grants to try to get kind of more specialized equipment, as I'm really interested in the integration of CNC technology and things like that as well. So those are ways that I start thinking about searching for opportunities and looking for opportunities. I had something else too. Essentially, I just look at my deficiencies in some sense. And I know deficiencies is kind of like a really terrible term to say, but maybe points of improvement. That's what I use when I'm teaching. Your point of improvement. So that's mainly where I start looking. Shows and things. When I start thinking about creating work. Now it's getting to the point, that's why I'm super fortunate to be exhibiting at the Sculpture Center, because it's this opportunity to idealize a new project or to bring something out into the world. So that was another kind of jolt that I wouldn't call it a jolt, I expected it coming. But I now need space to exhibit work. So it's not like, okay, here's the set due date, here's this hallway space, or you sign out this critique space, and now you kind of have this pretty consistent place to bring your objects to fruition. So when I start thinking about larger projects or things that I really am just kind of itching to idealize, that's when I start more so applying for or looking within my networks. But I typically look to things like College Art Association. I'm a member of the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh, where they have call fors and postings. So, and I also look at my regional creative community as well, and peer networks. So much happens now, especially post-graduation, just word of mouth.
Yeah. Sarah, I was gonna say, thank you for those insights, Kylie. That's really interesting. I like the idea of like the looking for points of improvement. But this next question is also for you. And so thinking about the idea of, so being an early career artist, and this idea about saying no. So basically, I don't know what your thoughts are on saying no to opportunities. Have there been any moments when you've like declined an opportunity, and like how did you make that decision?
So what I'm thinking, okay, so there's always been, and I heard this mainly in undergraduate school and coming in, like the idea of saying no, like as an early career artist, you never say no as an opportunity. But I don't think it's always necessarily a bad thing. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it if it's going to give me a quality focused time on an alternate project of some sort. So I know when I'm thinking, I just didn't try to prioritize my opportunities, honestly. If I'm looking at an event like a solo exhibition, I always tell my students, you just have to look at your opportunities and figure out what's going to get you closer to your professional and creative goals. So I prioritize things like solo exhibitions, anything that I can do to create work and keep building momentum in my creative work. I'm also really engaged in my teaching practice and things as well. So those are things that I would also prioritize. And ultimately my teaching practice also feeds my creative practice. But anything that's going to get me closer to those larger goals. So there are some instances where, you get, I can't think immediately of a more concise, like specific opportunity that I've said no to per se. But maybe like a smaller regional thing where a friend or so reaches out, or a colleague reaches out and says, hey, this is coming up, and if I know I have this wonderful opportunity at the Sculpture Center coming up, it's like, if it's going to take my focus away from some of my other commitments, I wouldn't be objected to saying no, or possibly asking for a deferment of some kind, or saying I'm really interested and engaged in your organization. Is there a way that maybe we could work at a later time, or I'd love to reach out at a later time? But I don't think a polite no is necessarily a bad thing, and especially if it's going to feed other parts of, if I stretch myself too thin, then I just do everything badly. I was like, all right, who's next? So I guess speaking of opportunities, since we're talking about opportunities and moving on to that track, and we've already touched on artist residencies and things of that nature a little bit, and I'm really interested. I also follow Emily on Instagram, so I know she's working on some residencies and things. So I'm interested in the way that artist residencies have impacted your creative practice, and what sorts of kind of fruitful experiences they've brought to your work.
Yeah, so I've had like a little bit of a range of long-term and short-term. And like you mentioned, right now I'm in a 3-month residency with the John Michael Kohler Art Center. So it's the Arts and Industry program. If anyone's interested, I recommend applying. There's a foundry residency and a ceramic residency, and they put you in the factory. So I'm in the factory with the associates on the daily basis and using the same processes that they use in the factory. So thinking about the way to like fill gaps, or like things that I just don't know about. Like I've made ceramic work for quite a while, but like I never make molds or do slip casting. So like it's my material, but it's this thing that so I'm like learning a ton. So that's one example. And then, you know, other things like, again, going back to what you said, Kylie, about filling gaps, like I was really interested in holograms a few years ago, and like trying to, you know, that's like such a specialized thing. I don't have any lasers at my disposal and space to do that. So I had to kind of seek out a resource, and like turns out there's like holography workshop through I think it was Ohio State. So they sent me there for a week, paid, unpaid. I didn't have to pay, right? And that's the other thing with residencies. I'm never going to put myself in a financial deficiency to go to a residency. And that might sound really picky, but the reality is I can make those opportunities and take those risks if I push myself hard enough in my, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to kind of burden my day-to-day to do the residencies. But anyways, so there's those, like filling the deficiency thing. Like I could never do that on my own. And then there's also other things that are that just like, like we went to Alaska for 8 weeks for a residency, and I had no resources. Like all my normal studio stuff went out the window, and I felt like it was liberating, but I was also super scared because I am so material, like I'm so based in my material that it was a really good practice for me. And I like made some video, I made photographs, which I never normally would do. So that's kind of, you know, really helped in the studio and bringing back those images and those videos and kind of having those in my studio space and linking those in. Yeah, I don't know what else. There's lots of, yeah, there's so many opportunities out there. I think you just really need to figure out, yeah, like what your need is at the time, what you're willing to negotiate in terms of being away from work, being away from family, if you can travel or can't travel at the time. What do they have to offer you? And that sounds kind of selfish, but like the reality is that's the way we need to think about it, I think.
Can I make this a little more conversational just to follow up on some of the stuff? Is that okay? So I'm really curious, you're talking about the industrial, I'm unmuted. You're talking about like they're putting you out like the industrial residency that you're working on with Kohler. And I'm thinking about like the artist residencies that I've been a part of. You're within a creative community that's already affiliated. Are the people that you're working with in the Kohler residency art oriented?
No, they're factory workers. Yeah. They are predominantly people that are trained in the one task that they do, and they're really, really good at that task. So if I have questions, I kind of hawkeye them from across the factory floor, and then I can go ask them questions. Some people are more approachable than others, but the residency has a liaison. So there's a technician that's kind of the in-between between the associates and the artists. So they kind of help coordinate if there's like blurry areas of like, can I use this piece of machinery? I'm not really sure. They can kind of find out like, yep, it's available after 2 p.m. You can use it after 2 p.m. But in reality, I'm plopped just kind of on the casting floor. You know, they're making slip cast urinals and sinks by hand. And there's not a lot of automation in that factory, which is also, I think, really great. Yeah. But like, this is going back to maybe more career-oriented relation to that. I applied 4 times, 4 years in a row. You know, like I was just kind of like waiting, and then I was about to not apply again. And I was like, I'll do it one more time. So I think that also something to think about is persistence, because I really, you know, I kind of came to the resolve that I was like, it's just not meant for me to be there, and that's okay. And so I think reapplying is normal and is actually pretty standard, because you're kind of always tapping at that committee or that person that is in charge of the search committee. You know, it shows this level of interest that is not fleeting. And I think that that says a lot.
Scott or Chelsea, do you have anything that you want to add to a couple of these questions that have been fielded back and forth?
The only thing I was just thinking is what Kylie or Emily said at the very end. You applied 4 times. I think I applied 7 times for the Sculpture Center show. And again, the last time I was like, I don't know, and I just finally did it, and then I drew the right straw. So I think persistence is the biggest key. I think it's my biggest issue is I'm probably not as selective in terms of what I apply for. I tend to apply for a lot more, and so in terms of opportunities, and if something seems close enough, I can put together an application. The only limitation is if there's a fee to apply. I've kind of stopped applying to shows or exhibitions that have a fee on it. Those add up really quickly.
If I can speak to the fee thing or the comment really quickly, then yeah, also all really great ideas. Yeah. Aaliyah said, if you don't succeed, try again. Definitely believe in that. Love Romeo Must Die as a movie. Anyways, so fees, one thing that I have appreciated from certain organizations where it's like, there's been times where, yeah, so broke, like literally no money. I also finally got smart and I have like my art account versus like my like personal like Chelsea like living account. Like I have 2 different just like a business versus personal, but it's just asking if they'll waive it. Just be like, hi, hello there, hey, so I'm an artist applying to not applying to a lot of things, but hey, I'm applying, I love the mission of this space, I love the space, blah blah. Can you waive this fee for me because $40, $35, even like sometimes $25, that's gas, that's like cheap groceries. So definitely just asking or looking for the contact person and being like, hi, hey there, girl or boy, or they them, can you please waive this fee for me? Highly appreciate it. That's been a move that like I've done a few times, and 3 out of 5 times they'd be like, sure, no problem.
Sorry. Kylie, did you want to add anything?
I think I came back and forth. I was just curious about the communities and like the difference of communities and residencies. So
Yeah, and Chelsea, you've been to Acre, right? And I feel like they have like that's really, when you're there, you're like there.
Yeah, Acre is a place where if you have to like people. Yeah, I mean, because it is very community driven. It's like also there's no like private studios. It's like communal spaces. Like, yeah, you might be working in one space one day, but like tomorrow that might be someone else's space. So the community is definitely really, really big. Like I learned how to screen print when I was, or like further learn how to screen print when I was at Acre. So the ideas of community are very, very big there. I also want to share, I've also gone to Oxbow, and Oxbow in the fall is also, have you been, are you, oh, nice.
In the fall.
Sorry?
It's funded in the fall.
Yeah, oh, yeah, so back to the whole, like, they pay you, yeah, Oxbow, they pay you, they feed you, like, that, like, yeah, it's really, really nice. I really like Oxbow. I'm actually taking, like, a mental health, like, self-care trip actually out to Western Michigan. It's in Oxbow's in Saginaw, Michigan, so I'm gonna head that way to take care of myself. And anyways, Oxbow also really great community, but a lot smaller. Acres like maybe 70 people or total, whereas Oxbow's like half of that. So yeah, I think that, yeah, for me, when it comes to looking at residencies, like community and what I can learn from someone, and also what I can teach from someone, like, in studio bits, it's kind of all those things are big factors in like when I'm applying to something. But yeah, love a good community. And have fun at Expo. It's so much fun.
Oh, Oxbow's great. I wish I'm not going, but I worked there for about 5 seasons, and they have a glass shop that's on a body of water, and the view is primo. I recommend it.
Really, it's amazing.
It is. It's so good. So Kylie, that might be good in the summer. It's really bustling. I don't know what their programming looks like, but if you're interested in like having that more immersive community versus like being in solitude, I think places like Oxbow and Acre
I was actually looking at
that are close.
and they have two different options for, they have like more emerging, and they also have a student residency as well. So I actually literally weeks ago was looking at their website and recommending them to students. So I think I have some students interested in applying there.
If I also want to be aware of time, but also want to share super quickly, they also have like a teaching, and you said you have like a teaching practice as well, or you're, they have like a teaching, like a, oh my gosh, I'm gonna butcher the terminology, but basically they have a residency specifically for teachers and professors. So that's also an option as well at Oxbow, and that's during the summer.
Great, thank you.
Nice. Okay. Okay. Okay, so why don't we move on? And the next big question is how you guys have made shifts in your work and the different kinds of items and issues and materials have influenced you.
Start too. I would say when thinking about, I'll talk about it from a few different shifts, because I feel like I put undergraduate in this kind of bubble. I put graduate school in this kind of bubble, and then the transition from graduate school to making now. But I feel like probably transitioning from undergraduate into graduate, or that sort of experience, I was specifically seeking out MFA programs that would challenge me more materially and interdisciplinary, so that I could learn to kind of approach ideas in all these different facets, which has especially helped me start making now, because there are time limitations. Of course, I teach at a university, so I at least have summers off, and winter, or not winters. I'm sorry, something popped up on the chat. Oh, sorry. So all of those things, I'm seeing that and thinking about taking a more interdisciplinary approach, especially from undergraduate into graduate school. And now kind of the larger shifts have happened in just the ways that I resolve my practice. So when I'm thinking about having more time to kind of let a project sit in the studio, and I'm taking it to different levels, I'm adding more possibly detail or taking more kind of approaches. I'm also revisiting mold making. So when I'm thinking about all these different facets and how I can use maybe similar imagery or similar imagery or symbolism, but alternating it, and maybe like I'm thinking about paper casting and kind of my previous experience and relationship with printmaking and how I can kind of merge these sorts of disciplines. So those are definitely ways that I've kind of seen my work progress, because I am just letting these types of materials bleed. These materials and processes and what used to be separate subjects, I guess, per se, in an academic art program or in academia, I'm kind of letting them bleed and kind of leach into one another a little bit more.
I can share if no one was going to say words. So thinking about this idea about kind of the shifting and the changing in studio practice, and yeah, then thinking about academia versus like non-art institute or art educational institutions, which I had a very funny, contentious experience in school, in grad school particularly. But I think also like just making, for me, is making more work that wasn't specifically meant for like an art audience. Like I started doing stand-up comedy as a like a method of performance, and so it was just really like fun and interesting to like engage in these certain ways, and sometimes it didn't work well at all. Doing stand-up comedy like I would do it in a gallery versus like doing it in a comedy club, it's like a completely different experience. So I think me just making work that was not meant for like an academic audience was like my shift when thinking about like the way I was making it, and also like, yeah, the way I thought and processed things.
Mm-hmm. Scott, what about you?
I'm waiting a few minutes because the church across the street is ringing their 6 o'clock church songs for the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
And I'm doing my best to listen to what people are saying. I apologize.
Okay. All right. Well, Emily, what about you? Let's give Scott some time.
Yeah, I think actually in school, so a similar experience maybe to Scott coming from, I had a really traditional craft background in undergraduate. I went to school for, there's not many craft programs left realistically. And at the time, and I think they've merged, but CCS in Detroit still had its craft program. And I don't know if they changed the dynamic. But I'm a product of that program with a really kind of intense material connection. And I think what grad school helped me do was undo some of that. So I think, yes, important post-grad, but actually in graduate school, being able, even though I was still in a ceramics program at Alfred is historically, its strong arm is in ceramics. They were totally fine with me kind of like backing up and undoing things. And working with lighting and just making plaster objects. And I didn't feel as hindered. So I think from that, I was able to carry that through till now, which is really nice. So I'm kind of just, teaching myself other techniques as I need them, as I see fit for work. I like pairing different material with ceramic for its translucency, for its like really fundamental reasons. So I feel like just the ability to be able to like teach myself new stuff. So learning how to solder and things like that. But I think after school, I realized that I could like keep doing that and not be so tied to clay. Even I am still, I don't know. I like it. I don't know.
It's an amazing material.
All right, I'll attempt to talk here. I'm sure you can't hear the church bells, but I hear it in my ears. I'm going to kind of build off what Emily was talking about and transition a little bit. So I was traditionally trained in more of a glass program called craft processes, but the graduate program I went to, the faculty there was in a glass program. He forced me to not work in the material in a sense. He was really open to kind of whatever it is, that voice that you're looking for, to find it and to pursue it. And so that was an important shift in the kind of production of my work, where the materials kind of went from material to concept and then experience. And it was he was pretty helpful. And then I was glad that I kind of chose that program, even though it's nationally, it's probably not the most well-known program, but it was really helpful to kind of be in a smaller space, in an environment where somebody could really listen to me and kind of really understand what I was looking for and kind of see into me, and be able to kind of take that and gave me a new direction to my work. And so I don't actually remember what the question anymore, but I was trying to build off what Emily said.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything anybody else wants to add to influences and changes and how experiences shape us and shape our work?
I can ask a question if we feel like we're good on that.
Okay.
Oh wait, yes. Let's see. Oh, well, so this maybe has a little bit to do with, Chelsea, what you mentioned earlier about moving the venue for you, like when you're doing a set in a gallery or a set in a club. But I guess this is maybe less career driven, but just like I'm interested in, for Scott and Chelsea both, and Scott, maybe in your, I know you have older videos on your website, but the show that's up currently, if you guys could talk about time as material, I feel like it's so potent, and I feel like you're both like kind of handling it in different ways. There's like spontaneity in some parts, or there's feeding from an audience, but then also I think about Scott and it's more of a mechanical time, or and I don't know if those are chance or happenstance. Like I don't know if you guys can talk about that a little bit.
Or okay, I'll go. I've unmuted myself. Yeah. So this idea about like time as a material, I think it's definitely something that I think about quite a bit. And maybe a little bit, well, because time and history, they're very interconnected, blah, blah, blah. So I think for me, it's this idea about like acknowledging history and acknowledging like histories that like are not always recognized or not always known, but like, which is like funny to me, because it's like, yes, like that history, that reality, like that's just evident from like how I grew up. But anyway, so I think for me, time as a material is really just like a revisiting of history or acknowledgement of like a lesser known history than lesser known to what demographics. Um, yeah, I think that's all I'll say about time.
And so, Emily, is the question relative to like time and video? Is that kind of the?
Yeah, and kind of like duration, or that the experience has like an anticipated duration, or there's a cycle happening. So like thinking about the kind of kinetic work you're making, then also like back to Chelsea, like what like the beginning, middle, and end of like a set looks like, or like what language that like that translates through or carries through, or like comedic timing. Like I don't know, maybe my question isn't as clear as I thought, but I just saw like the way that the two of you are using it is similar but quite different. So I was just interested in that.
No, I think that's what I was thinking. I just want to make sure I answer the question kind of in the way it's being asked. So when I make a piece, I always think about the experience of the viewer first. Is kind of my first approach. And I think about materials, and I think about interaction. And then I want the experience, regardless of whenever the viewer enters the piece or participates in the piece or climbs into it, to be the same yet different each time. And so so there is no beginning, middle, and end within the structures I create. It's kind of generated as to when the person walks in and when the person leaves. And in some ways, it's been based on one specific, well, I guess a couple of specific, but the idea of when you walk into a gallery and there's a black box. I always hate when I'm halfway through a film and I don't know which part of the film I'm in. So I've always tried to design pieces that have, it doesn't matter at which point in time you walk into it, you're still getting the same experience. So mine tend to be more short based or definitely based on repetition or looping. But I'm from the beginning of the design of the piece, it's always been just think about the experience and materials and the materials and the relationship to the experience. And then what kind of interaction am I trying to create through the piece? When more late, it's been thinking more about sound and the way that sound can be really kind of a component to create environment. But it still kind of comes back down to experience. All right. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Or were you going to ask a question? I'll go after you.
Well, was I supposed to ask a question earlier? Because if there's like a role I'm supposed to play, I think I missed it. Is that right?
I feel like the question that maybe you were going to ask, I think we kind of already like touched on it.
Well, there's like,
it feels
I'm sorry, like I'm bad at scripts. So I'm gonna just be as humble as I can right here now. And was I supposed to ask you a question earlier, Chelsea? Because I'm happy to jump right in. I think Laila was trying to get me to ask it. Is that correct?
Well, there's actually theoretically another question I was posing, which then your question comes up. So
I got you. Okay, I'll stop talking.
So why don't we do that? Because hopefully that'll generate more conversation. So this one's about acknowledging failure and learning from it, which of course we all have survived. And it can be really, really important in the way work that develops. So can you describe a time when a project or an idea really failed and what resulted from that? How, especially if it was an idea that you were really committed to, how did you move forward?
feel like I could look back at some of like my academic, especially my undergraduate work. I will look back and think I was like really hot stuff. And then I look back and I was like, I feel like that whole 4 years was technically a failure, right? But then I think about all the seeds and things that it had planted in terms of like learning materials or learning different, just maybe professional strategies of sorts. I'm thinking back to projects and things that I had executed in graduate school as well. The graduate school that I had a summer intensive. It was kind of essentially like, it was Maine College of Art. They had a summer intensive. So it was like 3 years shoved into 2 years. And I'm thinking about the work that I had to make under some pretty limited time constraints and thinking about just how it was really bad. Like I'm thinking of a specific like concrete piece, and I was investigating like maybe objects and things hanging in space, and trying to think of ways to like break the frame and push ideas of presentation, and it all went horribly wrong. I just looked at it and I was like, this is like a pile of concrete with some 2x4s hanging from the ceiling. But then I think about it further, and I start to think about ways that I was thinking about the frame, and then going back and finding other ways that those sorts of material and spatial and presentation challenges I wouldn't have done otherwise. And so acknowledging and thinking about failure and how I can kind of look back, and it's a very humble experience going back through my old portfolio. And that's why I really love going, especially to academic artists lectures and things, because it's like, they're bold artists that aren't afraid to share those things. And then you can see that kind of trajectory of learning through materials and kind of seeing those material fumbles or those spatial fumbles or presentation fumbles, and how they grew and resolved over time.
Sorry, I skipped ahead on my question. I realized I was like really out of order with the last question I asked. I'm sorry.
Doesn't matter.
Okay. So I do have this, I had this moment of making a piece in my studio, and my studio was really cold, talking about failure, and I brought it into the gallery and installed it. It was warm in there, and adhesive had totally started to delaminate because my studio was outside in essentially like a pole barn. And then, so like, as I was installing, I started noticing things. And then eventually, like a couple days in, I had to go back and like refix some stuff. But like, that is like a really, like, it's partially like an embarrassing experience, but also, again, like this learning experience of like making sure I'm paying attention to the things that no one would normally even want to think about, like temperature of application and temperature shifts. But now I know.
I've totally had experiences, yeah, where your sculpture just breaks in your hands and you're like, well, this is what I have to work with, right? And that happens a lot when I'm teaching too. And there are some instances where maybe I'll have a more rigid group than others. This tends to happen in sculpture because everything's new. You know, the shop equipment's scary and things like that. But it gets to the point where it's like, I can see the shock in their face and I can relate to the shock. But it's kind of like, here are the cards, work with it. So it might be really uncomfortable now, but there are instances where this is going to make you do something you wouldn't have otherwise. And this is, it stretches that kind of, I call it like the creative repertoire, right? This option of possibilities that I think school is great at harvesting. And then now the job is furthering those, I guess.
Thinking about failure, that's funny. I listen to a lot of DJ Khaled, so all I do is win, 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 no matter what. But those few times when I don't win, I'm thinking about a very specific performance that I did in it wasn't even a comedy club. It was in a gallery, or it was like in an alternative gallery space, and I just got no laughs, like none at all. Like I just got blank stares. And it was like it was like a 45-minute like set that I had. And I finished it. I saw just for 45 minutes, blank stares, no smiles. And I was like, y'all can leave. You don't have to sit through this thing. I'm gonna finish because I wrote it. But that's probably my favorite moment of like failure. But I learned a lot from it. Yeah. So yeah, I think in stand-up comedy and in performance, there's a lot of like this line of like failure is like super interesting, and also like it's a very thin line because while laughter really may not have been, and I think laughter, like kind of reflecting upon it, laughter wasn't necessarily like the measure of success, but maybe for me, but for me, it was kind of like continuing this like very, it was kind of intense. So like, and so the performance was more or less kind of like a retelling of my childhood and like not trauma, but like growing up in growth and in relationships with like family and whatnot. So like once again contentious. So anyway, so the idea of like not the lack of laughter, even at the parts that were supposed to be jokes, like that failure is still like a really interesting space to be in. But yeah.
So Chelsea, you said that you don't consider laughter in for your work or the work at the time a measure of success. Is that right?
Yeah, or I'll just say that like the end goal like, wasn't to get people to laugh, but like, you know, like I would have taken a chuckle just because it was like a very heavy topic that I was touching on. And so it's kind of like, and so sometimes along with time, I'll use the audience as like a material where it's like I'm not messing with you, but it's like you are a part of this piece and your reaction, it's not integral, but it's a part of it. So the notion of like like I tell a joke, well, ooh, sorry, but this is being recorded. Anyways, I tell a joke about being hit and like, is it abuse? In the state of Ohio, technically it wasn't, but was it? Maybe it was. So the idea of like someone like laughing at like me potentially being abused, it's basically kind of like implicating the audience. So that idea of people not laughing because like, yo, I'm not a terrible person. I don't want to laugh at this, but also you can. I'm laughing at it. So if that does that kind of answer your that
No, it does.
clarifies it.
It was just something I hadn't thought about for your work in terms of like the interaction from the audience and laughter and the way you kind of view success based on how people if it's you're making us a functional cup, you want to make sure they hold the cup correctly or they want to drink out of it. So it's kind of I had thought about laughter as being a measure of success. For the question, to be the humble side of me is going to say the show I put on for the Sculpture Center is a measure of failure in a sense, only because I am in there to see Grace twice a week because parts keep on breaking and I have to replace them. I figured out what all but one pieces had to be repaired at one point in time, which is not a reflection of the gallery and the way that they are managing the work. It's more about the design of the work. I've always kind of felt like every project has to be a new idea. And then I'm unfortunately always willing, like I'm too stubborn to realize that maybe I should slow it down. And once I've learned something, I should do it again. Instead, I think about the next idea and I keep on pursuing the next idea. And then there's inevitably, as soon as I start pulling in motors and technology and programming, things don't go right or code's wrong, or I'm taking something that's designed to be used for one purpose and I'm altering it, and I'm kind of pushing its limits. And so right now I feel like everything I do is a failure, only because I kind of keep on trying to kind of push the idea a little bit. Keep on pushing the idea is what I keep on trying to do. But I'm not calling myself a failure.
That's good.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Please.
Just once again, want to be aware of time. But
Okay.
oh, I mean, so I feel like we've been talking a lot about like our masters or like undergrad, grad school. This is for Emily, but also anyone who wants to answer it can. I'm really curious, like, what inspired you, Emily, to pursue a master's degree? Like, did you feel like you needed additional education? Yeah.
Yeah, I made notes about this, but I honestly, I didn't think I was going to go to grad school initially. And at the time, I was in a long-term residency in Kansas City, Missouri, and I was making work. I felt supported in like all these ways that sound really great and wonderful, but I was really stuck. like in the studio. Like I was there, I was like doing the thing, I was spending the time, I was making some work, but I felt like holistically stuck, and that I needed more time to do research. I needed more resources. And I think I was really also looking for peers. I had peers there, but all of my peers there were all based in the clay community, which is wonderful and great. But I felt like I needed peers outside of the thing that I knew. And so I did apply kind of on a whim. That time frame is like Thanksgiving, if that sounds right to everyone. And I was like, I'll just do it. I'll see what happens. And if not, I'll just apply for some other residencies or something and see what happens. So I waited about 5 years too. It was between undergrad and grad. I held off because I didn't think I was going to go. I also didn't want to, this sounds crazy, I didn't want to pay for it. I was waiting to also have enough, I think, mentally, like to be able to negotiate a tuition waiver. So yes, I think I needed, like, I don't know if I felt like I needed more education, but I needed more resources. I was hungry for a change and hungry for more resources. So yeah, that's why I decided to go, and it was great. I had a wonderful time at Alfred. It's a little bubble for sure. It's in a small village of a place in Western New York. There's not anything else going on there, which was great because all there was to be in the studio. But yeah, what's everyone else's experience with that? And like, when did you know you wanted to go? And was it what you thought? Chelsea, you mentioned maybe it wasn't.
I mean, I can speak. It's not that it wasn't. I will say that the whole, like, I do wish that I had waited. I waited 2 years, and really, why did I apply? I don't know why I applied. I know why. I think because I felt like I did. I think what I learned in undergrad, it was gnarly, had a fun experience, or learned a lot, like conceptually. But I think skill wise, I was lacking, and I wanted to attain more skills. But I think also I didn't do the most research that I could have done for, like, when looking at grad schools. The whole, like, not having to pay for it. Of course, there's programs that pay you to go. I think had I realized that, like, 6 years ago, oh my gosh, I realized that 6 years ago, I think I would have, I don't know, who knows, maybe it would have been different, but maybe not. But I think also being a person of color in a traditionally like white space, that's what made it very makes it difficult to navigate. And I think being in a space that wasn't not flexible, because I think that wasn't inclusive to students of color. I think that's what made my experience very difficult. I think also I'll share, I went to Cranbrook. It's a petite, like there's like 70 people, no, 150 people like in total in the program, and like there are no classes. So like, or I'm not bitter. So there are no classes. And so it's meant where it's like, it's really meant to push you to like really to be like an active, like creating artist or a working artist or whatnot. So like really like your studio and critiques and maybe reading, maybe some other kind of professional development elements are a part of it, but it's really meant to like you and your studio, like really, really working. So that was also a really interesting format. But I think, yeah, I think just like, yeah, grad school, it was an experience and now I'm here.
So what I would say is the reason why I chose grad school is I needed a change. I had been struggling with many different jobs for many years. It was 5 years between undergrad and graduate school, and I knew my work had gotten to the point where it was either going to be that or a completely different career, like engineering or something like that. And so I knew I was at that point where like a shift had to occur. And so I applied for 2 years until I got to the program that, well, the reason why I chose the program for two, one was location. I was married. My wife wasn't willing to move outside of the Ohio area. And two, I got a got money to go there. And so where I got accepted to some other programs on the coast, East Coast, and got no money. And so at the end of the day, the choice I made did transform my life. It got me to where I am right now. And so it was the right decision. And I didn't know that at the time, but sometimes you just have to kind of go with the gut.
It's my experience. I went in straight from undergraduate into graduate school. I didn't take any time off, and I'm half torn, right? I'm half torn on that decision. I think things worked out great and the way that they needed to, of course. But really what pushed me, I wanted to continue working, and I know I wanted to continue working. I felt that when I had graduated, I was a little bit ill-informed about what my other options were outside of graduate school. So I knew I could do residencies and things, but then you're balancing, there's the balancing act of like, okay, I have to eat too, and all of those other sort of life necessities that have to take place. And also I feel like there's kind of this cultural trend. I'm from West Virginia, Appalachia. There's kind of this cultural trend. It's like you get educated and you get out, right? Or you use this as kind of like the ticket out, which now that I'm back, I look towards my practice to kind of challenge that, because it's like we make art so we can make the environment the way we want it. It's like we make our space how we want it. But I also saw, in a way, I wanted to experience in a different cultural region. I wanted to continue making, and I also wanted to have something to bring back to my community. And I thought that graduate school was the way that I could make that happen. And then now I had every anticipation of staying in New England, but then job opportunities brought me back to West Virginia, and I came back kind of kicking and screaming a little bit, but couldn't imagine doing anything other than what I'm doing right now. So good place to be.
So Scott, you had a question for Chelsea, and Kylie, I believe you had a question for Scott.
All right, so now it's my turn. All right, thank you. So Chelsea, what are the differences in creating more performative-based sculpture inside and outside of academia? Have you found your work is responded to differently with audiences that may not be as familiar with your art or as familiar with art? Has this influenced the way that your creative career is sustained in any way?
I'm gonna admit the chat popped up and I got distracted. I'm sorry, hold on. Looking at it.
I can read it again if you want.
Or I have it over to the right. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's, oh no worries. Love Claire. Hey, lovely. I think that, I mean, there's a huge difference. I think that like, once again, this idea about like creating work within like an institution, whether it be like an art institution or an educational art education institution, like it's just different things. Whereas I think that, at least for me, from the way that I was educated, like critique was kind of like I'm doing this performance and it's for critique, which is like, okay, no thank you on your perspectives. But whereas like if I'm doing a performance or creating a sculpture or doing an installation really outside of the institution, like it is for like the audience to experience. And so I feel like there's just like this idea about the hierarchies, or the educational hierarchies are disbanded, which is something that I really appreciate in like working outside of like an academic institution. Like, for example, I did a performance where it's acknowledging like pop culture, black culture, and it's in the form of like a game show. So I've done it in the institution, and it's a very different conversation, it's a very different engagement. Whereas I did it for this sidewalk festival in Detroit, and so it was just a completely different engagement. Like I had children responding and like trying to answer questions about like things like from the 90s and 80s and 70s, and it's like, okay, child, I wasn't even alive. How do you know these things? So I think it's just very different conversation. It just feels more fun in a sense. Like outside of the institution versus being within. And does that answer your question? I think it does. Yeah, it does.
So my question, even though I guess it could kind of go towards Chelsea as well, since you both have just kind of a really broad array of viewer engagement or audience engagement, or that sort of diversity and kind of all these moving parts that you have to work with to develop and create your work. I was curious, especially with Scott, looking at Scott's website and seeing many of the public art opportunities and pieces that he's created. So I was curious to know, I'm interested to know more about the complexities you face completing public art projects and commissions, and in what ways do these projects influence your career that may differ from your other work?
I would, to the second part would be, how is it different from my other work? When I do the art projects, and I wouldn't say many, I count 3. And so I guess in some ways I make it look like many on my website, but it's really more like 3. I think the big difference is that when you do the art, when I do the public artwork, I have to drop the label artist, and I have to become a designer. I am making work for somebody else. They are liking the work that I've made previously, but ultimately I am making something that's kind of speaking to their voice, to their project, to their building, to their park, or whatnot. And so I have to start to take into what other people think of my work, but also then what their needs are as well too. And that informs kind of the designs that I kind of make. And that's kind of been the biggest, that was the biggest realization I had, is that I'm not an artist when I'm doing the public work. I'm a designer. And I think the way I have found in the last couple of years that I think I'd like to be the designer more than the artist in some ways. And I kind of enjoy the process of hearing what people's needs are, and then I can kind of get informed about how others kind of see and perceive my work. I have a very, I wouldn't say selfish, might not be the best word, but I just very focused into my work, and I don't really kind of connect with how other people are viewing my work and interacting with it. And so by taking on these projects, I can kind of get feedback from them as to what they see, and then I can kind of respond to that. But then when you get the projects, then you have to put your project manager hat on. And then you have to manage finances, materials, shipping, production. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. And I mean, it's worth the experience. I don't apply to a lot of shows anymore, but I do of late apply for more of the public ones. And there's a persistence to it. Like we said earlier, you just have to, if it's something you want to pursue, you have to keep on going for it. And you're going to, what I've also found, and this kind of goes, I think, with the residency questions and the other ones, is that for a long time when I didn't get accepted for something, I took that as an aspect of rejection. And I saw that as, okay, they rejected me, and especially when I really focused in on something that I felt like I was really I felt like I was really qualified for. And I realized at some point in time that it's not a rejection. It's just that they have a different vision in terms of what they're looking for. It's not an aspect of failure. It's just a matter of a different vision per se.
Do you ever feel like those visions kind of fluctuate over time when you think about just the different persistence? I know sometimes applications and things have different committees. So you have this just kind of rotating factor. And of course, like, none of us are working in a vacuum. The cultural sphere changes over time as well. So that was kind of an interesting point. Thank you, Scott. Mm-hmm.
Emily, did you want to still ask about the space and equipment?
You're muted, Emily, if you're speaking.
Hi. Do we have time to ask that?
How are we doing?
We're at the time. I know there's some questions in the chat that we could answer if you didn't want to ask, Emily.
Yeah, I think we've talked about studio quite a bit, so I feel like an access. So I feel like we can ask if there's questions.
Okay, so do we have time? There was one more question. I was meant to ask. Should we skip that one and go to the questions, or should I go ahead and ask it?
I'm team questions, but that's just me. Sorry.
I missed what you said. Sorry. What did you say?
She said question. I think she said questions.
Oh, I wasn't sure if you're talking to me or Grace. I was saying I'm team questions. Let's give the people what they want. I don't know, but that's just me.
Whatever.
Let's move to the questions in the chat, shall we? Laila, I'm sorry. I'll have you read them out.
Okay. I'm a painting major, a painting MFA candidate at Kent State and a former student of Kylie's. This has been so helpful. This question is for anyone. Where did you see your work halfway through grad school? Or any advice towards leaving a comfort zone in your work to help grow and shape it moving into your second half of school?
I would say do it. And if you have an idea, don't be afraid to pursue it, and especially if it's outside of any area that you know. And this is coming from someone that admitted earlier that I tried too many different things, and I push you. But I always think it's worth it to learn something new, and to take something on. And the experiences, while you might appear to not be that great, I think at the end, anybody's going to grow from that. As long as, and it's just, I would say, if you have an idea, go for it. Where you get those ideas from, I don't know though.
And that's a 2-year program, right? And some MFAs are 3, and I think that 2 is the right amount. I think, like Scott was mentioning, it's enough time to give yourself some permission. And also, I know that you guys have access in the summer. Obviously, I don't know COVID wise what that looked like, but and like deeply taking advantage of that, and like in the summer pretending like this is my full-time job. And obviously, you'll have to probably work a job too. But I guess what I'm saying is, without classes, it's kind of this freeing space to have. And but I think, let's see, halfway through, I feel like halfway through, the things that were in the thesis were starting to perk, but it wasn't like a 1-to-1, like I don't think like anything I was making was the first iteration of a thing, because sometimes you have to shed other stuff, right? You kind of throw it all at it, and then you can start eliminating things that don't work, and then substitute and rework. So I think there'll be nuggets, and I'm sure that you have your nuggets already, if you're halfway through, and try not to get held up in having like, well, what's the show gonna look like right away? I would recommend don't freak out about that. And when your committee knows you're ready to put in that proposal for what the show looks like, think about it then, but think about it in terms of like spatial decisions. So you don't feel so overwhelmed by like, this painting's going to be right here and it's going to look just like this. I don't think that that's giving yourself enough authorship and credit, and it's not letting you trust yourself enough, in my opinion.
If I could, I was just, okay, really quickly, I just want to say that, like, also thinking about grad school, where it's like, it's really also just like the beginning of things. Like there are projects that I started in grad school or that I did for my thesis, and then it's like, once again, wow, time flies. Like, like 4 years later, and I'm revisiting these ideas, but like in a different format. So just because it's like, I think that literally, like, it's just the beginning. Like there'll be so much that you do afterwards. So for me, halfway through was very much like experimentation. Like my first year, it was very like object based and kind of these performative objects, whereas my second year, it was very like performance heavy and these performative installations. So I think just like experimentation, I think, is just I think kind of like Scott said, just being able to kind of try different things, I think is really important, especially if it's like you have the space, you have the facility, and you have the community that's willing to listen to you, or it's like, you know, willing to like kind of give you feedback on your work. That's a kind of a really great space to be in.
Yeah. I would say in terms of like growing out of comfort zones, I know graduate school is notorious for pushing you to do that, whether that be materially or conceptually or however. The first year I felt graduate school, the first year I was getting affiliated in a new place, getting affiliated with new people, and kind of getting used to a new structure. So by the second year, this might be the worst thing ever for a teacher to say. But I always try to say, like, I'll just say it. Don't get hung up on grades. I'm not saying don't think about them. But at the same time, I see students get so worried about checking these academic boxes that they're not planting the seeds that they need for creative endeavors. So when I'm thinking about going, if I could go back and redo my second year, I would of course be the thesis is a practice run for professional, right? And to look at it very much as that, or I won't say practice run, but and to have this kind of repertoire to leave school with. But I really very much see academia as this way of planting a seed and kind of a seed for the future and archiving. So instead of thinking about being pushed out of your comfort zone per se as this sort of resistance, it's an uneasy feeling. But if I'm able to reframe it as a sort of excitement, this is the moment that I get to try something different in a somewhat safe atmosphere. And it's like you have a forced audience. Somebody has to look at your work. Right? You know what I mean? And you have to get feedback about it. So using it as such, that's what I would go back in and be like, okay, I have this captive audience that has to look at no matter whatever work that I have. So that'd be my advice.
Thank you guys so much. That was really helpful. I mean, you can keep talking, but I just wanted to say thank you for that. And thank you, Kylie.
Imagine the MFA show is the beginning of a thing and not the end of the thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Like the continuation.
Yeah.
So you can avoid the freak out zone, as I used to call it.
All right, the next question starts out with a thank you all so much. This is from Leanne Ashbrook. I'm wondering if anyone has any advice for young artists leaving undergrad and how we can continue to nurture our practice in between undergrad and graduate school.
I found becoming a member of an arts organization to be really a really beneficial part of way of nurturing my career. Because one, I have access to a multitude of resources. I really think highly of the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh. But it's like I have this avenue of exhibition opportunities. I have this avenue of creative sort of resources. They also do professional development workshops, things of that nature. And that they also do, there are different avenues of doing like open critiques and things of that nature kind of. So I'm still kind of getting the best parts of an academic experience, but it's a little bit more tailored towards sustaining a practice, I guess, and not necessarily, there's still a little bit of creative development in things, but it's really kind of the nuts and bolts of how can I keep going. So that would be one of my kind of advices. Find your community and find an organization of some kind that also have these sorts of partnerships within your region.
Yeah, I would say for Kylie, I never sought the community, but I joined a studio. I rented from a studio, and there were two guys that I rented from, both they're now in their 60s and 70s, but they had experience and they offered guidance. And so if that's something you're able to do, find a studio I never thought of it as a community until you started talking. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what that is. It's just a community. And I got into their network and then it kind of spread out from there. So just identifying the community that of people or organization and learn how to grow from there.
Yeah, and when we all feel more comfortable being around everyone, I think that openings or events are really important, and then also maybe not being shy to just introduce yourself to people you don't know. And it can be really challenging and awkward. And I think we're all probably more socially awkward now than we ever have been. But I think I used to really recommend that to students, like when I was teaching at Kent, that we would go to Cleveland and it's only 45 minutes, you know, like minimize, like, I know it's kind of far, but like, it's not a big deal, just go. And basically make your body be in the space that you want your body to be in the future.
Yeah, it's good to, it's been a little bit difficult with COVID, but it's really good to also go help out. If there are places, organizations, et cetera, that you're interested in, volunteer. You get to know people, and that also helps you to spread your network. You know, if they see you're a good worker, you're enthusiastic, they'll introduce you to people, and all sorts of great opportunities can come from just those kinds of interactions. We have another question. Also, thanks. This is from Otto Ribeiro. I think I mispronounced that. Ribeiro, sorry, I'm murdering it. Thanks for sharing today. I would like to hear from any of you about lessons learned when it comes to documenting your work. If documentation is important to your practice, do you prefer keeping multiple hard drives up to date or using the services like the cloud?
I feel like I literally reviewed this weeks ago in one of the professional practices class I teach. When I think about documenting artwork, and I was fortunate to went to one of my colleagues, her peers in graduate school, and a good friend now, is a wonderful art documentarian. And his whole theory is that most people experience your work through documentation, not actually in person. So he almost challenges that the documentation of the work is more important than the work itself. I still feel like the work is important, but so, and I always kind of joke with my students that, like, if you lose your pet and you have a poor photograph of your pet, do you think you're going to get your pet back? So I kind of think about that in terms of like the relationship between that and when you're submitting to shows and things of that nature. If they don't know what your work actually looks like and they don't get this crystal clear, crystal clear image of how it's supposed to be experienced or what it looks like, or some of the more minute details that really make somebody appreciate the work, that can really negate your chances of getting the opportunities that help you work toward your goals. In terms of cloud, like, I also teach a computer class. Anything that can go wrong with a computer will. So I back it up, especially the good documentation. I definitely think it's even worth hiring somebody to document the really great stuff. And so anything that I can back up, I do. I'm not opposed to using cloud-based services. I'm also not opposed to using like digital media platforms and things of that nature either, or social media platforms and things of that nature to kind of document and catalog my work in different kind of formats and processes and things. So and like multiple hard drives, like if I could multitude, yes, absolutely. Back it up on an external, back it up on a cloud. I don't even know, apparently flash drives aren't a thing anymore. My students are like, nah, that's not a flash drive. But if you need it on a flash drive, put it on a flash drive. Oh my goodness. If it'll disappear, it will.
If I could also, or just build off of that, like, I mean, I have an external hard drive, and really I didn't get one until my friends who were like photo people are like, what are you doing? Like, what if you lose all your stuff on your hard drive? So I have it backed up, but also just thinking about documentation, as someone who does like time-based, so like video, like documentation of a video in a space, like maybe that's not the best way, but also thinking about writing about your work, like captions, at least for me, are super important, because like while a still from like a 2-hour-long performance, like yes, you'll see images, but like if a lot of it is the audience like watching me, like that's not going to tell like a jury, or it's not going to tell someone with much information. So really having strong written captions, like that is also part of my documentation of my work. So I think just like, yes, there's the visual and there's like the video, but also like how you write about and how you present your work is like super important within it.
It's always been recommended to me that I hire someone, and I've never had the finances to do that. So instead, I just make sure I have like a small setup, and then I've also like asked people if I could use their space to photograph work. If my space isn't conducive, I will like places I've worked before. I'm like, hey, at night, can I bring in a truckload of artwork and set it up and photograph? Because sometimes we don't have that like clean white space. I've used, you know, my apartments before in the living room. Yeah, but I think yes, backing up, yes. Because I've had the freak out where I thought I lost things. It's not pretty.
Also bartered. I've also bartered with my photography friends as well. Be like, I'll build you this cool thing if you photograph my thesis. So that's why that's another thing I like the academic setting too.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I'm going to step in and congratulate you all. And thank you so much for being so honest and sharing your own stories with each other and all the listeners here. So thank you, Emily, Scott, Chelsea, Kylie. Thank you, Laila, for moving things along and just making this a great night. So I know there's only a few of us left, but I do want to say that Scott and Chelsea's exhibitions are up at the Sculpture Center through May 8th. And then Kylie and Emily's exhibition will be opening May 17. Where did I know I wrote it down. Where did it go? May 21 through June 26th. So I thank you for, I know you're probably stressing to get ready for the show. And so thank you for joining us tonight. You know, just please stop by if you can. Otherwise, you know, send us an email. We'll do what we can to help connect you with the artists. So thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for the
Great.
opportunity.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening. Goodbye.
Bye.